Steel. For centuries, it has been the gold standard of weapons: swords, spears, armor, the tools of kings and empires. But what if I told you there was a weapon sharper than steel, a material so advanced, so precise, that even modern surgeons admit steel simply cannot compete? This isn't fantasy, it's the true story of how Native Americans created weapons that could slice through flesh, pierce armor, and even terrify the steel-clad conquistadors who first set foot on American soil. They didn't need furnaces, they didn't need iron ore. They used the fire of the earth itself, lava, cooled into volcanic glass, which we call obsidian. And the results? Blades sharper than anything Europe had ever seen. So tonight, we'll journey deep into the world of native craftsmanship. We'll uncover how obsidian weapons were made, why they were so devastating, and how their legacy lingers today. Because when you hear the phrase, weapons stronger than steel, you may never look at stone the same way again. Imagine walking across volcanic land, jagged rocks crunching beneath your feet. Then you spot a black shard glittering in the sun. You pick it up, and as your thumb brushes against the edge, it cuts your skin without effort. This was the discovery countless native cultures made across the Americas. Obsidian is volcanic glass. When lava cools rapidly, it hardens without forming crystals, leaving edges far sharper than any steel blade. Archaeologists have found obsidian tools dating back more than 11,000 years. In Mesoamerica, entire trade networks formed just to transport this black glass. Some cities were built near obsidian mines, their wealth tied directly to the ability to supply warriors with blades. One of the most famous sources was Pachuca in central Mexico. Its green-tinted obsidian was so pure that it spread across the Aztec Empire. It was worth as much as precious stones. Modern scientists put it under the microscope. What they saw shocked them. Steel edges, even finely polished, looked jagged and rough, like a saw. Obsidian, on the other hand, fractures at the molecular level, leaving an edge so smooth it can slice between individual cells. A surgeon once said, "Steel is like using a hacksaw. Obsidian is like using a laser." And Native Americans had mastered this material long before the first steel sword ever touched their shores. But sharpness was just the beginning. The way native cultures weaponized it changed history. And when Europeans finally came face to face with obsidian weapons, the results were so shocking they wrote about them in disbelief. What they described is almost unimaginable. Perhaps the most famous obsidian weapon was the Aztec macuahuitl. At first glance, it didn't look like much. It resembled a wooden paddle, or even a cricket bat. But along its edges, craftsmen had embedded rows of razor-sharp obsidian blades, held firm with natural resin. In the hands of an Aztec warrior, it was no crude club. It was a nightmare. The conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote that he saw horses cut down in battle, decapitated in a single blow. He described soldiers struck so violently that their heads were severed clean from their bodies. Imagine the horror. A knight clad in steel, struck by what looked like a crude wooden club, and realizing too late that it could bite deeper than his sword. The macuahuitl combined two principles, sharpness and momentum. The obsidian edges acted like rows of scalpels, while the wooden base gave the weapon the weight needed to drive those blades deep. Unlike steel swords, which dulled with use, obsidian never dulled. It broke, yes, but while it lasted, it cut with unmatched precision. Spanish accounts claimed the macuahuitl could even slice the head off a man in one clean stroke, something that took European swords multiple blows. So already we see why conquistadors feared it. Obsidian wasn't a gimmick. It was sharper than their swords, heavier than they expected, and devastating in battle. But the real genius wasn't just in the weapon, it was in the craftsmanship, the science of making glass sharper than steel, without modern tools. Creating obsidian blades was no simple task. The process was called flint knapping. Craftsmen used antler, bone, or even hardwood to strike obsidian in controlled ways. Percussion flaking, striking the stone to remove large shards. Pressure flaking, using a pointed tool to carefully push off tiny flakes and refine the edge. This was a skill passed down through generations. A single wrong strike could shatter the piece. But done correctly, the result was an edge sharper than any swordsmith in Europe could dream of. Every warrior's weapon was unique, crafted by hand. Unlike the mass-forged swords of Europe, these blades were precision tools, made for their owner, balanced for their strike. Some archaeologists today believe obsidian knappers achieved a level of precision comparable to diamond cutters. And obsidian wasn't limited to swords. Across the Americas, arrows, knives, and even ceremonial blades were engineered with deadly skill. One of them, in particular, shocked modern scientists in the lab. From the Great Plains to the Andes, obsidian arrowheads and spear tips were everywhere. Modern ballistics tests show obsidian-tipped arrows cut farther into flesh than steel points. Hunters brought down bison, elk, even mammoths in earlier times. In war, obsidian arrowheads could pierce mail and leather. Spanish soldiers wrote of wounds that seemed impossibly deep for such small projectiles. But there was also a ritual side. Obsidian knives were used in sacrifices, their sharpness making them the perfect instrument for bloodletting and offering. To Aztec priests, obsidian wasn't just a weapon, it was sacred, tied to the gods of fire and earth. So, obsidian wasn't only about war, it was hunting, it was ceremony, it was technology and religion woven together. But of course, no weapon is perfect. The very thing that made obsidian terrifying was also the reason it never replaced steel. Its fatal flaw would shape the fate of empires. Obsidian was sharper than steel, but it was also brittle. Steel could take blow after blow. Obsidian often shattered after just one. And yet, native warriors knew this. They didn't rely on endurance, they relied on lethality. One strike, one cut, one victory. Some macuahuitl were even designed with replaceable blades, obsidian shards that could be swapped out between battles. Imagine a warrior carrying extra blades into battle the way a modern soldier carries spare magazines for a rifle. To Europeans, this was astonishing. They thought of swords as lifelong companions. For Aztec warriors, weapons were living tools, to be broken and remade again. But obsidian was just one part of the arsenal. Native America's weapons included bows that rivaled the Mongols, clubs that crushed skulls, and daggers carved from bone, and some of them were just as shocking as the glass blades. In the north, bone daggers carved from elk and antler pierced flesh with ease. In the forests, war clubs with embedded stone heads shattered skulls. Some were so heavy they could break bones through armor. And then there was the bow. Composite bows made of wood, horn, and sinew created draw weights rivaling the Mongol bows of Asia. In modern tests, arrows from these bows pierced chainmail. They were not only weapons of war, but instruments of prestige. A powerful bow was a status symbol, a mark of a warrior's strength. So far, we've seen obsidian swords sharper than steel, arrowheads deadlier than bullets, and bows with the strength of Mongols. But the most chilling part of the story is what Europeans wrote when they saw it all firsthand. Spanish conquistadors were stunned. They wrote of horses mutilated, soldiers cut open, heads severed in one strike. Steel armor offered some protection, but not enough. In the opening clashes, it was obsidian that ruled the battlefield. Conquistadors admitted in their own journals that they had underestimated native weapons. They expected crude clubs and spears. What they found were weapons so advanced, they could scarcely believe they were carved from stone. But here lies the twist. If obsidian was so powerful, why didn't it dominate the future? The answer comes not from the past, but from modern science. Experiments in hospitals and labs that show why obsidian still fascinates us today. Obsidian didn't vanish. In fact, it still amazes scientists today. Some surgeons use obsidian scalpels in experimental surgery. Under a microscope, the cut is so clean, it heals faster than steel incisions. Some say patients even scar less. But obsidian's brittleness makes it unsafe for mass use. One slip and the blade shatters. Still, obsidian has earned its place in both history and science. It is proof that ancient civilizations were not primitive. They were engineers, surgeons, and craftsmen of the highest order. Sharper than steel, deadlier than iron. The true story of obsidian, the weapon that made steel tremble. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and supporting this channel. We're still pretty new, and every subscription helps us bring you more of the best, strangest, and most fascinating stories from history. There are countless more tales of forgotten inventions, bizarre experiments, and moments that changed the world forever. So if you're curious about the hidden corners of history, make sure you stick around, because the past is full of stories you won't believe. And we're just getting started.